Welcome to TechNA Question Entry 2 with Bill from Polis Orbital.
Hello, Earthlings!
What is your craft?
My craft is building cities in the correct order. Not buildings, cities. The difference matters.
Most orbital projects start with structures and aesthetics. We start with obligations: air, water, power, healthcare, emergency response, law, and governance. Those systems are invisible when they work, but they're what allow everything else to exist. On Earth, we don't move people into a city and then ask how the water will work. Aqueducts come first, charters come first, transit and emergency systems come first. Housing fills in around them. In space, we were about to reverse that order, because it's easier to launch modules than institutions. Polis Orbital builds orbital cities the way civilization learned to build cities the hard way, as public works. Our craft is making something complex feel boring, dependable, and assumed, because that's what allows people to stop surviving and start living.
And why is it your craft?
Because we recognized a failure pattern before it happened. Early space habitats worked because they were small, exceptional, and temporary. People adapted because they had to. But adaptation doesn't scale into civilization. Once you cross a few thousand residents, missing infrastructure stops being inconvenient and starts becoming political, then dangerous. A water shortage becomes a governance crisis. A medical gap becomes fear. Unclear authority becomes social fracture. History already ran this experiment on Earth. Cities that grew before their institutions collapsed, sometimes quietly, sometimes violently. In orbit, the margin for error is smaller, and the consequences compound faster. This became my craft because someone had to stop treating orbital cities like products and start treating them like civic obligations. If you build them in the wrong order, people pay the price later. We decided to own that responsibility up front.
Who commissions a city like this? And what does the customer journey look like?
Our customers are governments and coalitions who realize that orbital presence has quietly become permanent and that improvisation is now the biggest risk. Let me give you two concrete examples. First, a multinational research coalition running a large orbital station. It started as temporary. Over time, population grew, families rotated through, legal gray zones appeared, decision-making slowed. No one was in charge of long-term responsibility. They came to us not asking for more space, but asking how to turn a station into a city without tearing it apart. We began not with design, but with alignment, governance, jurisdiction, funding, health systems, emergency authority. Only after that did we design the physical city around those decisions. Second, a government planning permanent orbital residency for critical infrastructure operators. Their fear wasn't construction, it was continuity. What happens when leadership changes, when systems age, when the temporary workforce becomes a population? In both cases, the journey starts with discomfort, not excitement. Then comes clarity, design, construction, and finally, habitation, only after the city is already functioning. But Polis Orbital stays on as the operator. We don't deliver keys and leave. Cities fail when builders disappear.
Can you describe the first Polis Orbital city? What does it feel like to live there?
The first city, Civitas 1, is designed for about 5,000 to 10,000 residents. It's large enough to support institutions, but small enough to remain legible. Physically, it's a rotating ring for partial gravity, connected to a central spine for logistics, docking, and industry. The city is segmented, so failures are contained, not contagious. But what people notice isn't the structure, it's the absence of urgency. Schools function, clinics are routine, transit runs on schedule, rules are predictable. You don't feel like you're living inside a machine that might fail. The analogy I use is this: it feels like living in a well-run coastal city. You know the ocean is there, but the seawalls, harbors, and emergency systems mean you don't think about it every day. If residents stop talking about the city itself, we've succeeded.
Isn't this just bureaucracy in space?
It only feels like bureaucracy if you've only ever encountered it late. Bureaucracy is what grows when systems are added after people are already stressed, crowded, and improvising. What we build is closer to plumbing. You don't call plumbing bureaucracy. You only notice it when it's missing. Cities that work have rules, responsibilities, and escalation paths that are boring because they're already agreed upon. In orbit, you don't get second chances to invent governance during a crisis. You either decide who's responsible before people arrive, or you let fear decide later. We choose earlier, quieter decisions so people don't have to argue when oxygen, power, or trust is on the line.
Why not let orbital cities grow organically, like cities on Earth?
Organic growth only works when failure is survivable. On Earth, if a neighborhood mismanages water or power, the city absorbs the shock. In orbit, the shock is the city. Early cities on Earth could afford chaos because gravity, atmosphere, and redundancy were free. In space, nothing is free. Every mistake propagates. We're not anti-organic growth, we're anti-fragile growth. Once the foundations are stable, utilities, governance, health, culture, and neighborhoods can evolve naturally. But if you skip the foundation, organic just becomes a polite word for unsafe.
Who decides who gets to live in one of your cities?
That decision is political by necessity, which is exactly why it must be made openly and early. On Earth, cities pretend they're neutral until scarcity forces choices. In orbit, scarcity is immediate. If you don't define access, responsibility, and rights before people arrive, you end up making those decisions in emergencies. And emergencies produce unfair outcomes. Polis Orbital doesn't decide who belongs. The city charter does. Our role is to make sure that charter exists, is enforceable, and is understood before the first resident arrives. That's not exclusion. That's accountability.
Are these cities for everyone, or just elites?
Every new city starts with a narrow population. The question is whether it stays that way by accident or by design. Ports, power plants, and research campuses on Earth all began with specialized workers. What mattered was whether the city was built to expand access over time or lock it out permanently. We build cities that can broaden, not luxury enclaves disguised as progress. That means public services, transparent governance, and obligations that scale with growth. Elitism isn't about who arrives first. It's about whether the system allows anyone else to arrive later.
So what happens if a city fails? Who's responsible?
Us. Full stop. Cities fail when responsibility is fragmented, when builders leave, operators blame designers, and governments blame circumstances. We refuse that handoff. Polis Orbital stays operationally accountable. If a system degrades, if governance fails, if trust erodes, that's a design failure upstream. Our job is to make sure failure modes are slow, legible, and survivable, not dramatic. Cities don't need heroes. They need caretakers who can say, "That's on us," and fix it.
How does it actually get built and stay in orbit?
I'll tell you, but first, Safa, could you get a bit more real for me?
I'll meet you halfway. So, how does it actually get built and stay in orbit?
The city is assembled in orbit, not launched whole. Core structural elements, life support modules, and power systems are launched in manageable segments and assembled using orbital shipyards and autonomous construction systems. The city is built in phases. First, the structural backbone and utilities, then pressurized volumes, then rotation systems, and finally, habitation. The city occupies a carefully selected stable orbit and uses low-thrust electric propulsion to perform continuous station keeping. Think of it like subtle course correction rather than constant thrust. Mass is distributed deliberately so the structure remains dynamically stable as it rotates. Nothing about the city relies on perfect balance or constant intervention. Drift and degradation are expected and designed around.
What about asteroids and orbital debris?
Primary protection is avoidance, not armor. The city is continuously tracked by a debris monitoring network that detects threats days to weeks in advance. Most objects are avoided by slight orbital adjustments. Moving a few kilometers in space is usually enough to miss something traveling thousands of kilometers per hour. Secondary protection comes from layered shielding in critical areas and structural segmentation. No single impact can compromise the entire city. Pressurized volumes are compartmentalized, and critical systems are duplicated and separated. The goal is never invulnerability. It's survivability without panic.
Can it be relocated?
Yes, but slowly and deliberately. The city is not designed for rapid movement. Relocation happens over months or years using continuous low-thrust propulsion. This allows orbital adjustments without stressing the structure or disrupting life inside. Think of it like moving a floating city by changing ocean currents rather than towing it at full speed. Relocation is rare and strategic, used for long-term orbit optimization, debris environment changes, or political realignment. It's a city, not a spacecraft on a mission timeline.
That's super cool. You know, what comes to mind is actually the idea of solidifying Jupiter and moving it closer to the sun. But anyways, last question. Does the city have any defenses?
Defensive systems are passive and protective, not offensive. Debris and micrometeoroid shielding, compartmentalization to isolate damage, redundant life support and power systems, emergency evacuation and shelter zones. Active defense against hostile action is handled by external security infrastructure, such as Sentinel Reach-type protective presence, not by the city itself. The city is designed to be difficult to harm accidentally and undesirable to target deliberately, not to fight.
This was awesome. Thanks again, Bill.
This was great, Safa. Come up here for a city tour next time. Lots to film.
Will do once this traction trench is dug for multiplanetary media. Cheers!
Oh, and we had two more questions for Bill from Polis Orbital. We asked him, how do people travel in and out? He says that travel happens through dedicated docking hubs. People arrive and depart via transport spacecraft that dock with non-rotating sections of the city. From there, they transfer into rotating habitation zones using internal transit systems designed to handle gravity differences smoothly. Traffic is scheduled and regulated like a port or airport, not a free-for-all. Emergency evacuation capacity is always maintained and tested regularly. No one just drops in. Every arrival is planned. We also asked him what supply production is like. He says that the city is not fully self-sufficient, but it is supply resilient. Air and water are recycled in closed loops. Food is partially grown on-site using controlled agriculture. Critical components are manufactured or repaired locally using additive manufacturing, and bulk materials and specialty items are imported. The design assumes supply interruptions will happen. Storage, redundancy, and local production allow the city to operate for extended periods without resupply, not forever, but long enough to respond calmly. The city produces continuity, not isolation. Thanks for tuning in. Oh, and one last thing. There was a one-line synthesis that was included at the end of entry 1 that describes Polis Orbital in a quite poignant way. This fictional orbital city manufacturer and operator was well articulated with this. Listen to this. Polis orbital cities are assembled gradually, stabilized continuously, protected through avoidance and redundancy, relocated deliberately, defended externally, accessed through controlled transit, and supplied through a mix of recycling, local production, and imports. The same way successful cities on Earth handle risk, just without gravity doing the work for free. We'd like to thank ChatGPT for the written material for the episode, as well as Grok Imagine for the imagery, and 11 Labs for the speech content. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
On the way out, be sure to pop by the store at techniquestion.com.